Disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of USA Global TV and Radio. The content presented is for informational purposes only and is intended to foster open discussion and debate. Viewer discretion is advised. USA Global TV and Radio does not endorse any particular viewpoint and encourages viewers to seek out additional information and perspectives. Saving America with Dr. David D. Schein.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Welcome to Saving America. This is your host, Dr. David D. Schein. And you need to be wearing track shoes to stay up with the news this week. Trump triumphed with the EU trade deal. If the deal is as good as the early reports say it is between the USA and EU, it will be a clear win for Trump and all Americans. I expect China will do a real deal soon or face being left out entirely. Honestly, sounded like a boondoggle with Trump doing a 5-day trip to Scotland to salute the opening of one of his new golf courses. Then the news was that there would be a meeting of the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Then the meeting was being held and a deal announced very quickly. That raised my suspicions. I believe the whole thing was a setup and the deal was done before Trump headed to Scotland. Part of the deal is that EU had to know that the gig was up. Hey, the US bailed out Europe twice in 2 world wars. Then the Marshall Plan, which rebuilt Europe. And following that, America was played as patsies for 70 years with major European countries blocking US products and selling their products in the US for high prices, but not paying any meaningful tariffs. A piece that makes a lot of sense with the likely economic counterattack on Russia due to the Ukraine attacks continuing. EU is to buy a bunch of US energy resources. This is a win-win-win, speaking as someone who is a hardcore anti-commie. There is also reported major investment in the US by the EU of $600 billion. Details are lacking there, however. Part of the timing here is not an accident, as the August 1 Trump-imposed deadline to make a tariff deal is now up. On the heels of this, South Korea came to the table. The deal means South Korean imports will pay a 15% tariff rate. South Korea will also invest $350 billion in the United States and purchase $100 billion in U.S. energy products. On the flip side, Brazil may face a 50% tariff. The problem here is that it's a country where the U.S. has a trade surplus. The tariff is retaliating for Brazil's criminal prosecution of former President Jair Bolsonaro. Trump had threatened the tariffs earlier in a letter to President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. I believe this is inappropriate as this is internal legal business in that country. I note that both the countries of Colombia and Brazil, 2 major coffee producers, are in struggles with Trump. While inflation may be sort of tame, coffee prices are surging. Maybe we need Starbucks to get in there and talk to Trump. Trump has extended Mexico's time to make a deal by another 90 days. Not sure why he's doing that. Of course, it's an odd turn of events. Canada has not made a deal, and I think for Canada, this is a more serious error on their part than even with Mexico. Note that fentanyl smuggling is an issue with both of those countries, as well, of course, with China. All countries that have not made a tariff deal are being given an extension, will be paying previously announced tariffs. China and the U.S. are under a truce in negotiations, so frankly, I'm not sure who's paying what right now with China and the U.S. As I've said before, I do want the U.S. and its allies to starve out China by doing all they can to stop buying anything from that repressive, murdering regime. That is how the first Cold War ended in favor of civilization, and likely will be the best way to end the current Cold War too. Despite what appears to be enormous progress with tariffs, one business and 11 Dem-controlled states have gone to federal court to challenge Trump's authority to impose these tariffs that we just talked about. Trump is using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. His pitch is that America is in serious trouble and needs to correct the severe balance of payments with much of the world. He's also raised national security arguments. The Federal Circuit currently is reviewing this and unlikely at the moment to rule in Trump's favor. However, I can foresee this bumping up to SCOTUS and expect that he may do better with the High Court. I could also see a split decision where in many cases it will be upheld, but not upheld, say with Brazil, since we have a trade surplus there. I'll keep a watch on this for our loyal audience. Violence continues to scar America. Virtually the whole world knows there was a tragic shooting in New York City financial district. A deranged shooter from Las Vegas drove all the way to New York City with a high-powered rifle and then double-parked his car in Manhattan. Photo shows this fairly young man calmly walking to the high-rise. He killed an off-duty policeman who was guarding the lobby and shot up the lobby. 3 more people were then killed and another man very seriously wounded. In a gift to the public, the shooter committed suicide. His suicide note that he's incurred a brain injury playing football. He reportedly, the target, he wanted to shoot up the NFL even though he never played even college football, much less pro ball. About the same time, news broke of a sudden rumble in downtown Cincinnati that found 2 white people beaten badly by a crowd of black persons. There is some controversy about the white male who was beaten. Whatever happened there, a white woman tried to render aid to the man once he was on the ground, and she is sucker punched unconscious. That part is very clear in the videos of the incident. A handful of black suspects have been charged. So the racial overtones of this are disconcerting on top of the violence itself. A sad aspect of this was that people stood around and filmed the melee with their smartphones, but only one person in that crowd called the police. Again, this is sounding like a third world country, not America. I did hear a speech by the mayor of Cincinnati that sounded pretty positive on criminal justice enforcement. That remains to be seen, folks. And of course, we recently had 11 innocent people in Traverse City, Michigan, Walmart, who were attacked by a crazed man with a knife. He was taken down by good citizens, one of whom had a gun, and held until the police got there. 10 of the 11 required hospitalization, but all are expected to survive. There was no common denominator here, and the stabbings appeared to be random in nature. I want to note that I attended a training conference in Traverse City about 20 years ago. It is a pleasant small town of only about 15,000, known for its cherry festival. Violence has crept into even this peaceful small town. Then, in a quiet hiking area called Devil's Den, a young mom and dad were senselessly gunned down while their 2 young daughters were nearby. The killer was reportedly a former 5th grade teacher, of all things. No known motive for the killing. I call for no bond available and a prompt death penalty in this case. In Tennessee, a dating dispute, of all things, may have left 4 family members dead, including another young couple who now leaves an infant and orphan. I call for no bond available and a prompt death penalty in this case as well. They're still looking for that suspect, last I heard. My friends, I do not have an answer for this. Banning guns is not the answer. That violates our Constitution. Trying to keep guns away from crazy people is a nice idea, but also does not seem to be the answer. For instance, I believe the person who shot at Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, had no prior record. We must somehow calm the mood of the country. Anyone listening who has some suggestions, please let me know. I'm thinking of starting a bumper sticker campaign that just says, "Be kind to each other." That is inspired by my unscripted politics co-host, Kevin McDonald. The economy, good news, bad news. The second quarter GDP, the gross domestic product, a broad measure of the success of the U.S. economy, was a surprising 3% in the second quarter versus an expected 2.7%. This would seem to indicate that the Trump tariffs were not the killer that the Dems hoped that it would be. Now, think about this for a minute, folks. The Dems are rooting against the rest of us Americans and hoping that things will go bad. Further, even better news, part of the reason for the increase was an increase in buying American goods. However, Trump continued to rail against Fed Chair Powell for not lowering the Fed rate. Nothing new there. The Fed board just voted 9-2 not to change the rate. Two commissioners have now come out in favor of the cut in conflict with Powell. This is not good news, as the housing market, a major part of our economy, needs lower interest rates to kick it into high gear. It is very depressed at the moment. As I recently noted, while inflation is not terrible at 2.7%, it is still well above the 2% Fed target. So that is the rationale to keep the Fed rate higher. Powell, by the way, still has 10 more months at the Fed.
All rise.
Our series Interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. Once you hear from our next guest, I am sure that you will agree that he deserves the moniker of interesting person. Saving America welcomes Dr. Stephen Bryen, who is a leading expert in security strategy and technology. He's held senior positions in the Department of Defense, on Capitol Hill as the president of a large multinational defense and technology company. Dr. Stephen Bryen has 50 years of experience in government and industry. Senior fellow of the Center for Security Policy. He served as senior staff director for the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, as head of the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs, as the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Trade Security Policy, as the founder and first director of the Defense Technology Security Administration, and as president of FinAmerica North America, and as a commissioner of the U.S.-China Security Review Commission. Bryen writes for Asia Times, American Thinker, Epoch Times, Newsweek, Washington Times, the Jewish Policy Center, and many other newspapers and magazines, too numerous to mention. He has published 6 books on technology and security subjects, including Technology Security and National Power and Security for Holy Places. He's contributed to a number of studies on national security and defense, holds a PhD in international affairs from Tulane, a postdoc from Virginia Tech, an MA in international politics from Tulane, and his bachelor's degree from Rutgers in political science. And folks, we had to shorten this so we'd have time for the interview. We welcome Dr. Stephen Bryen for his first appearance on Saving America.
Well, thank you for having me. I made it long enough to create a filibuster, use up time.
Well, we're still going to give you the full time for your answers, because as we talked about pre-interview, very, very interested in the subject that you deal with. And as you know, we ask our guests 3 questions. How would you evaluate the readiness of the United States to win the second Cold War?
Right now, not too good. I think we have some real deficits, some problems. The biggest one, aside from the types of equipment that we have, is the availability of equipment. We don't have enough. Our stockpiles are way down. We didn't expect the Ukraine war to suck out as much hardware and equipment as it has, and it's taken an awful lot. And we weren't prepared for that. And if we're going to be credible and we're going to be able to deal with a rising Russia and a rising China, which I think are the 2 main challenges for us, then we have to be properly prepared, and we're not yet.
And would you say that Russia, which of course launched, I understand, 700 missiles at Ukraine over the last night, is moving in a little different direction than just tanks on the ground? Because I understand the land war in Ukraine using a lot of materials, but it doesn't seem to have made much good for either country.
Well, the Russians are gaining ground, so we have to be a little bit cautious about
Yes.
how we evaluate it. But the warfare process has changed a lot, mainly thanks to new weapons like drones. which have made it very difficult to use traditional armor on the battlefield, which is the formula that the Russians followed, the formula the Ukrainians followed, the formula that the United States followed. So everybody's now in a kind of a conundrum as to, how do we prepare against these new kinds of threats? And then there's the whole missile threat, which is, we saw that in Israel from Iran, the launch of Iranian missiles in large numbers. We've seen it in Ukraine with the Russians using Iskander and other types of missiles, some hypersonic. Um, and the air defenses just can't keep up. They're not really good enough. So we have a tremendous challenge in front of us in terms of how to do war fighting, but more than that, if we're properly prepared, how to deter a war, which I think is the most important thing of all.
Yeah, when I say winning the Cold War, that is, of course, how we won the first Cold War, through up to about 1990, was the fact that the Russians became convinced that we would beat them in a war. So that's
I
why I
think they were
refer to
right,
this.
by the way.
Yeah,
That was I had been working in the 80s in the Pentagon on precisely that question.
sure.
And we didn't have the volume of equipment that the Russians had then and still have, but we had very good equipment and we used computers and electronics much more than the Russians did. So it gave us a qualitative advantage that nowadays has sort of disappeared.
I understand. And what's the current risk to the United States from China and Russia with regard to outer space? That's a big concern of mine, and I don't hear enough discussion about it in
Yeah,
public.
yeah, there's not very much, and yet it's quite critical because if President Trump is right, and I think he is, that we need a space-based air defense capability to go after Russian or Chinese missiles to protect the United States, then being able to protect those space platforms is critical. And, the Russians have anti-satellite capabilities. The Chinese have them, and we have them, but not as well developed and not in quantity. So I think the future will be preparing for some kind of space defense, let's call it that. That we'll have to be able to protect our satellite. I'm a big fan of Elon Musk's space link system, Starlink, it's called, because it uses thousands of satellites. He's projecting up to 47,000 satellites.
Wow.
That's terrific because what that means is if you want to find the one that's causing you trouble, good luck. And I think we have to take the same approach for uh, Golden Dome, which is what President Trump calls the forthcoming space-based defense system. It has to be on hundreds, if not thousands, of satellites so that it won't be possible to blow them out of space, which is what the Chinese are hoping to do and the Russians hope to do. But mostly the
I
Chinese, I
understand.
think they're the most significant risk today.
You're right. And people think I'm talking about, we both of us grew up with the Star Wars and
Yeah.
shows like that and movies like that and the wonderful imagination of Gene Hackenberry and so forth. But the reality is that the most effective defense might be an offense where we develop a satellite technology or space technology so that we can identify and take out as many of their satellites as possible.
Well, again, you have to have enough in orbit and in the right places to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's still
So,
the same challenge. And I think right now, uh, in the United States, the only guy who can do that in an effective way on a mass basis and also with recoverable rockets is SpaceX, and that's Elon Musk.
right. Well,
No one
I
else is
saw,
even near that.
the dispute between Musk and Trump that's in its sixth week now
Yeah.
is unfortunate. And one of the things that Trump said, and I'm certainly thinking that he said it in a just a fit of anger, is that well, we don't need SpaceX and Musk can go broke, but I get concerned because remember that our trusty major manufacturer, Boeing, sent two astronauts up there and they didn't trust the satellite enough to take them back. And SpaceX brought them back, not Boeing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the thing's interesting is that Ukraine today, the Ukrainian army, is utterly dependent on Musk's Starlink system for communications. Without that, they're out of business. So any threat to cut off SpaceX and cut off Musk is silly. It's just plain silly, and it's not real. I mean, I don't think Mr. Trump would do that. I don't think Musk would get that angry to cut it off because he could cut it off in a second. But it does illustrate how much this matters to our national security. It'd be nice if the Pentagon figured that out. They're still a little bit behind the curve, I'm afraid.
Well, it's a very serious issue. The United States cannot do everything that needs to be done to improve the security of the free world. What would you suggest as priorities? In other words, what do we need to do first, and what do we need to tell our allies?
Well, there are two things that we need to do. The first one is we need to improve the manufacturing of our weapon systems to a level where we can have enough to deal with the threat. Our output is way low, way low. And even with simple ammunition like a 155 millimeter shell, we can't produce them fast enough. And the new plants that we're trying to open in Texas seem to have fallen apart. So we got a problem there. We got an industrial problem. We have a workforce problem. We have a supplies problem. All that really needs a high level attention to be fixed. So that's the first thing is to get our manufacturing on track. And the second thing is to stop concentrating on more and more sophisticated equipment that takes too long to manufacture and is too expensive. Because, the budget for this year for defense is approaching $1 trillion. Now, if I had $1 trillion when I was in the Pentagon, I'd been in Fat City, but I wasn't, I didn't have that. We were worried about every nickel. But, today I think the cost of equipment is just staggering. I'll give you a couple examples. The cost of that Patriot missile that has been controversial in the last few days, should we send them to Ukraine or shouldn't we? They cost almost $4 million a piece.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of money.
Yes.
If you talk about the SM-3 2A, which is a ship-based, Aegis-based anti-aircraft and anti-ballistic missile interceptor, the top price there is $28.7 million a shot. I don't see how that's sustainable. I mean, it's just not, because the other guys can make a lot of missiles cheaply. So we've got to come up with some solutions that aren't so expensive. And I think the thing that really worries me is the Defense Department, bless its heart, never worries about the price of goods. That's not their department, but it is their department because you
Yes,
get
it
less
is.
and less for more and more money. And that's not a good thing today. So I think if I were Pete Hegseth and I had this responsibility at DOD, first thing I would do is say, I want to see a 30 or 40% reduction in the cost of goods. And that's for starters. And challenge them to get pricing down and to get the cost out of these systems, because it's going to kill us if we don't get smart. And in Europe, it's even worse. Because in Europe, you have unions and expenses that go way beyond social credits and all this stuff that raises the price of goods beyond in the stratosphere. They can't afford it either. And while they pledged to go to 5% of GDP, I'll make you a little bet, never going to happen because they don't have the money. So it's really very important to find ways to reduce costs and to become more efficient if we're going to be able to have a credible defense.
Well, one thought I had on this was if we could reduce conventional armaments like the tanks that are, I saw one of your articles about the tanks and
Yeah.
that they're not doing very well. Is it the Abrams tank? And the thing is that can we reduce our traditional arms and switch more of it to mass production of what's really needed today?
I think we could. I mean, look, I wrote about robotics and tanks, to try it. I mean, I think robotics are really important as a solution because it not only lowers the cost of the weapon itself, but it reduces the crew on it needs to be risking its life driving those things. So there are a lot of there are a lot of hidden costs in defense that you forget because if someone is wounded or killed in a fight, I mean you're going to pay for that for the next 20 years, right? So
Yes.
so you need to take that into account. It's part of the price of a weapon system today. The attrition rates on tanks in Ukraine, the Abrams tanks, it's about 2/3 of what we sent there has been destroyed. That's not acceptable. It's not,
I had
not
not
good.
heard that until I read your article on that.
Oh, that's
And
it.
because it makes it sound like the Russian tanks have taken a beating over there, but
They did.
I
They
hadn't
did.
seen people mentioning what happened to the tanks we sent over there and our allies loaned to them.
Well, the same thing happened to the Leopard, the German tanks,
Yes,
and the British. They didn't send very many, but their Challenger tanks didn't do very well either. So because the nature of warfare has changed, that's what I've been trying to emphasize.
right.
And maybe the tank and traditional doctrine of how you use them doesn't work on the modern battlefield. You have to go to other things. And by the way, these tanks aren't cheap, not by a long shot. They started at around 10 million and the all up Abrams tank is about $25 million a copy. So you're talking about a
Wow.
lot of money. We can't afford this sort of thing. And
Yeah.
we're a rich country. But I think we can, and we have to figure out more cost-effective ways to protect our nation and to protect our allies.
Well, it sounds like some very important pieces. And Dr. Bryen, as you know, we promised the people that we interview that we're going to keep it short, but hopefully our audience is fascinating as I am about what you talk about. How can our audience get more information about you and your important work and your publications?
Well, I mean, I do write for Asia Times, so you can always go there. The other possibility, and I think it's the one I like most, is I have a Substack called Weapons and Strategy. And if you go to substack.com and look up weapons and strategy, you'll find it there. You can subscribe. It's free. Um, and I contribute typically 2 articles a week. So I'm pretty productive
Wow,
in my old
you
age.
certainly are, sir.
Please proceed.
An interesting policy reversal by Target. In a time of intense competition among retailers, it seems that Target has taken a step back. It announced that customers will no longer be able to price match major competitors like Amazon and Walmart at the register. The policy has been in effect for about a dozen years. Shoppers used to be able to show the ad from the competitor showing a lower price for the same item. The policy is now limited to comparisons with other Target stores or its online operation. This does not seem to be getting into the trenches and competing with the other big guys. Reports of universities making deals with the Trump administration. Amid well-reported attacks on Jewish students and DEI discriminatory policies, the Trump administration has gone after a series of universities. One of the highest profile is Columbia University, just reported as a $221 million settlement agreement with Columbia. Frankly, this sounds like greed to get back on the U.S. government gravy train and not a real change of heart. This remains to be seen, of course. Subsequently, there have been rumors that fellow Ivy Harvard is willing to settle for as much as $500 million, but that deal is not confirmed at all. On the heels of this, UCLA paid a $6 million settlement regarding a campus Jew exclusion zone that resulted in discrimination claims from students and faculty members. This is yet another sad example, but again, does this mean there has been a real change of heart? With focus on the high-profile Ivies in schools like UCLA, I note with interest reports that George Mason University in Northern Virginia, which is close to D.C., has been under investigation for race-based hiring policies. It apparently has already agreed to change practices, but the president who put this discriminatory nonsense in place, Gregory Washington, is still there. Having spent a lot of time in the D.C. area, I was interested to keep an eye on this school. In the meantime, speaking of university presidents and the state of Virginia, its jewel, the University of Virginia, had a sudden resignation of its president, Jim Ryan, just a short time ago. I'm not aware if there are any similar accusations or federal investigations that triggered this move. Reportedly, alumni and members of the board were upset at the woke direction UVA had taken over the last 5 to 10 years. In one report, I heard that UVA had a DEI director who was being paid more than any member of the faculty. As someone with 2 graduate degrees from UVA, I, for one, am happy to see Ryan leave. Let me keep the record straight. I want to see diversity and welcomeness across faculty, staff, and students of all American universities. What I do not want to see is illegal racial or other preferences that are not based on merit tied to individual contributions. And speaking as someone over age 50, it is time for all universities to stop discriminating on the basis of age. I have personally experienced it, which is ironic because my students enjoy the fact that I bring many years of business and law experience into my classrooms.
How does the defendant plead?
More disturbing news on Russiagate. I've been holding back on my comments on Russiagate since there's been no indictments yet. However, this past week, FBI Director Kash Patel reported that an employee found thousands of relevant documents in so-called burn bags. This is consistent with these recent reports that some dirty folks in the FBI, along with unnamed deep state conspirators, helped to hide the real Russiagate scandal from the public. The newly discovered docs were turned over to Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley. I am not a fan of Chuck, who is about as fresh as a banana that's been on the counter for a few weeks. Let's see what he does with this information. Many conservatives out there are upset that there have been no indictments yet. Whatever happened to manners? I am from a large family with little financial means. However, from the time I was little, my mom emphasized good manners. These are basic things like opening the door for women and the elderly, saying please and thank you, and even which fork and spoon to use at a nice dinner. Little did I know how much that would help me when I was still a teenager. I was thrust into the public eye as a member of the press and the business world. I received wide acceptance during that period of my life, and I credit my upbringing. Last week, I was traveling to my annual teaching conference in Providence, Rhode Island. In the 2-hour flight, I sat next to a talkative lady from Providence. She shared that she was at a wedding and gave a lift in a rental car to 3 other people attending the wedding. One was a man her age, about 70. The other 2, a younger couple. She stopped for a quick top off of the rental car gas tank. Not one person got out of the car to help her pump gas or offered to pay the $12 to $13 gas bill. Manners have disappeared in this country. I shared with her that I never get in a car when there's a woman or child boarding the car. I also note that so many do not put their shopping carts back in the provided racks in the parking lots. This causes damage to other people's cars and is just rude. How do we practice better manners ourselves and help others to be more mindful? The point being, manners are in shambles in this country, and it shows. In my earlier commentary, I discussed a scourge of violence in America. Is there a tie-in between manners and not caring about our fellow humans? Just something to think about.
Please raise your right hand.
Important, scam alert. This is sort of personal. Some friends of mine have received bogus texts, and now I have received one. The FBI has warned all mobile phone users that there are scammers out there doing what are called smishing messages, which combines SMS and phishing. So sort of like a bogus email, but a text instead. The FBI says more than 10,000 scammer sites have been set up to harvest unsuspecting recipients' bank and financial information. The scam text initially said the receiving person was overdue in tolls and needed to pay that amount, often small, immediately. This happened to 2 friends of mine, and I just received one in the last few days. Funny, since I do not have a toll tag, nor do I use toll roads. Now, some of the texts are also claiming to have deliveries. Note that due to certain security blocks by the phone service providers, the new instructions tell the recipient of the text to copy the URL into a browser rather than hit it directly. Often the URL will look sort of legit, but have extra characters upon a more careful review. As many of my audience know, I'm a staunch supporter of the death penalty. Perhaps if a few of these scammers are caught and pay the ultimate penalty, the others will get the message. Just a suggestion, folks.
Objection, Your Honor.
Joann's, the 82-year-old popular fabric and art supply chain, has been struggling. Last year, the company went into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which is called a reorganization. Under the plan, they hope to close some non-performing stores and get some new financial help. Apparently, things did not work out, and they again filed for Chapter 11 in January of this year. The plan was to keep the stores open and work things out. Well, that did not happen. Later, it was to close 500 of the 800 stores. Then there was a bankruptcy auction. That was held in late February, and a company called G.A. Joann Retail Partnership, which is a subsidiary of asset disposition company GA Group, was the winning bidder and will now oversee the complete liquidation of Joann's remaining operations. This is still subject to bankruptcy court approval. The Fast Company article noted that this bankruptcy has a wider impact. It stated that Joann's has been a go-to retailer for crafters, quilters, and sewing enthusiasts for decades. As we have reported almost weekly here on Saving America about the closing of brick and mortar store chains, times are changing and it is tough. Further, many seamstresses and craft folks would have meetings at their local Joann's stores. Times are changing, sadly, and not for the better in many cases.
May I remind you, you're still under oath.
Why a rash of plane crashes as fares hit record levels? As someone who flies frequently, I'm now worried about the safety of flying in the United States. This is not related to Trump's cuts to the FAA and other agencies. Frankly, the DC swamp is a boondoggle. Time for deep cuts. At the same time, this in no way impacts who is in the control towers around the USA. The new Trump administration claimed that the country is short on air traffic controllers by as much as 1,000 due to a DEI approach under Biden. Well, for whatever the reason, time to make sure our control towers are fully staffed or send the planes to control towers of airports that are staffed. This happens at a time when I have never seen air travel so expensive. So, more costly and less safe. What a lousy combination.
Silence in the court.
George Allen Kelly, age 75, was accused of murder for protecting his property. He was charged with second-degree murder, but the trial resulted in a hung jury after 2 full days of jury deliberations. The judge declared a mistrial. The prosecution has announced it will not retry the case. I feel badly that this gentleman had to go through this process. I want to be clear. Murder is never okay. However, killing to protect yourself and your family or innocent members of the public is a right all Americans should have. Prior to trial, note that Kelly rejected an agreement with prosecutors to plead guilty to negligent homicide. So Mr. Kelly stuck to his guns, no pun intended, and it turned out okay for him.
I'll allow it.
Biden autopen scandal. The latest scandal is the accelerating reports that Biden signed a bunch of executive orders, and specifically those controversial pardons late in his administration via an autopen. That in itself is not that big a deal. The obvious question is that given his level of dementia, did he personally and knowingly authorize each and every presidential action? My personal opinion is that he did not. Probably not even close. However, as an attorney, I want to see the proof. The celebration in the Trump administration is their hope that if the pardons were not properly authorized, those who were pardoned are not really pardoned. This could be really interesting.
Order in the court.
And our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. And when you hear this guest story, I know you're going to agree with me. Saving America welcomes Professor Amy Wax. She's presently professor at the law school at the University of Pennsylvania, which is the trigger for this interview. More on that in a bit. Her incredible educational background is BS in biochemistry and biophysics from Yale, followed by a medical degree cum laude with distinction in neuroscience from Harvard, then practiced as medicine in New York for 5 years with a residency in neurology. So while working as a doctor, she earns her law degree from Columbia University, where she became an editor of the Columbia Law Review, won numerous awards. Then, as a full-time attorney, she clerked for a federal judge. She then went on to teach at two top law schools, University of Virginia and then at Penn, her present law school faculty position. Penn's law school is about as far left as you can get. Professor Wax has been open about her concerns regarding minority students and also about participation of certain minorities in politics. This has caused a firestorm at Penn. I had to cut this bio short, otherwise there'd be no time for our interview. I want to quickly note that I obtained my BA at Penn and have 2 graduate degrees from the University of Virginia. We welcome Professor Amy Wax for her first appearance on Saving America.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me.
It's our pleasure. So, as you know, we ask our guests 3 questions. As a careful reader and conservative who has personally taught at an HBCU, I do comprehend your comments about Black students in higher education. Why were your comments mischaracterized by your fellow academics and others as racist?
Well, first of all, let me just address the term racist. The term is used very prolifically and very promiscuously in the current atmosphere. It's thrown around as a weapon. And when people are called racist, they usually tremble and retreat because, you know, in some quarters it's the worst thing you can be called. But my view of it is that the word is ill-defined. When I ask people, why do you call me racist? Can you define the term? They can't. And when I do get a definition, I get, you know, something different every time. So that's made me a lot, you know, less wary of that term. I think it is a fertile ground for abuse and misuse. And I've been called it so much that it's kind of lost its sting. So I do not, you know, it depends on your definition. You know, am I a racist? Am I not a racist? I don't spend a lot of time worrying about that. I really have to tell you. I spend a lot of time worrying about the future of our republic. I spend time worrying about the quality and honesty and integrity of academia, about the decline of our civilization, about the abandonment of Western values, about the dilution of the meritocracy, which is a very important part of our strength as a country, as a high-achieving part of the globe. Those are the things that I worry about. So, you know, the racism label is something that just doesn't keep me up at night, I have to tell you honestly.
And part of this was statistics, wasn't it, in terms of what exactly was the performance of different groups in your school? Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, the point I was making, this was a conversation with Glenn Lowry, who is a Black professor at Brown, an economics professor, very intelligent man, very wide interests. One of his interests is obviously the future of Black America, affirmative action, how affirmative action works, what its consequences are. And we were talking about some of the downsides of affirmative action. One of the downsides, of course, is that Blacks are overplaced through affirmative action. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that they end up attending schools where the average student has higher scores, is more academically capable than they are. And part of the consequences of that, and we can discuss and argue about the consequences of that, whether they're good or bad. And I didn't sit there saying, oh, it's all bad. You know, there's arguments to be made on both sides. I said one of the downsides of that is that they struggle to do well academically. That's just kind of what you would expect, right? I mean, if you are someone with a 650 math SAT, which is actually pretty good, and you're put in a class where everybody has an 800, you know, at MIT or wherever, you are going to face an uphill struggle. You are very likely you're going to probably not get an A. maybe not even get a B, because the course is geared to the 800 person. But if you went to a small college where the averages were in the 600s, you might actually paradoxically learn more. That's called the mismatch effect. That's different from the overplacement effect. The mismatch effect, which has been described, is that if you are overplaced, not only will you do relatively poorly, but you'll actually learn less than if you go to a place where you're well matched to the other people, because of, maybe there's a discouragement effect, or maybe it's all going to fly over your head. I don't know, but nobody really wants to look at it because they don't want to acknowledge it. Now, this is all a perfectly valid set of discussions and concerns about affirmative action, pro and con. As I tell my students, this is a policy question. Are we going to have affirmative action? So we ought to be able to discuss all of the aspects of it without becoming hysterical. But weirdly enough, these schools have decided that the proper tactic is to just bury and hide the truth, which is the, underachievement, so to speak, of a lower grade pattern of affirmative action admits. They think that somehow by hiding that, people aren't going to find out. Well, I have news for you. The law firms know it. The judges know it. The people who, whose maw we're feeding. We're an HR department for all these people, of course. They know it. They end up overplacing students anyway because they're under pressure to engage in affirmative action. But at the end of the day, it does not end very well. Because sooner or later the buck stops, as you know. But these are valid conversations. But it was quite strongly signaled to me through my dean bringing charges against me and other attempts to penalize me and sanction me that this could not be said on campus.
Yes, I'm going to interrupt you there because I want to keep the interview short. And I know both of us are pressed for time, but I want to switch gears just a little bit because I'm going to come back around to your situation with UPenn. And again, we both have been there. You're there now. I was there. Parallel to the first situation that you encountered, you've made comments about Asians in America participating as Democrats rather than Republicans. Could you please share more about your position on this? Because this also got some flack, although it seems like a very innocent statement.
Can you state that again? Which Americans?
Sure.
Asian
Americans.
Oh, Asian Americans. Yes. I mean, so this was, people keep saying I said this on a podcast, which is not true. It was a discussion following a podcast with an Asian friend of mine, George Lee, who is a stalwart Republican and a stalwart conservative and is Chinese. And we were discussing the perplexity of why Asians vote so overwhelmingly for Democrats, as Jews do, of course, because it would not seem to be in their interest. Asians are meritocrats. They are very bourgeois. They're very law-abiding. They're very hardworking. They have, so many virtues. Their families are strong. And you would think that, a lot of what the Democrats are peddling would not be appealing to them. The lack of being behind law and order, the lack of interest in the meritocracy, their pushing of equity, some of their permissive policies wouldn't gel with Asians. So why do they all vote for Democrats? And we couldn't come up with a theory really that was entirely satisfactory. A lot of it has to do with immigration, with Republicans being identified with Christians as being depicted as intolerant. I mean, there's all sorts of misconceptions and conceptions out there. But at the end of this interchange, I said, well, as a Republican who believes in the core Republican values, my view is we're better off with fewer Asians as long as they're voting for Democrats, because they're going to push the country, I think, in the wrong direction. There are other cultural reasons, I think, why we shouldn't be overwhelmed by Asians. It is a different culture. It is a more conformist culture. People say this to me all the time. Even Asians say it to me, right? They're not as concerned with, liberties, rights, the First Amendment, free speech. They think it's like some fetish that white people have, they should get over. It's just a different mentality. And all told, so this soundbite was lifted out of a much more complicated discussion. Like I was some kind of bigot, like I hate Asians. No, I have a lot of Asian friends. I'm thinking more generally about the direction of our country, about which party I think, should be in control, and also my general penchant for immigration restriction. I am very much an immigration restrictionist, especially from non-Western countries. And you put it all together and you get this little sound bite that was like ballyhooed everywhere to prove that I am an evil person.
Mhm.
But
And
you have to
linking
read the
that,
actual exchange. Yeah.
linking that to our third question, which is you get quoted, and a lot of people in the public eye get quoted on sound bites rather than in the
Oh,
context of what they said. And
it's
so
unbelievable. I have
you've run
learned the
into,
hard way. Yeah.
as I called it, a firestorm at UPenn, which is a very probably one of the most liberal schools, probably the 10 or 12 most liberal schools in the country, though it's getting harder to use that identity because there's been such protest on relatively small schools and remote schools. But a report I read said you were offered $50,000 to reach a compromise with Penn, but you turned it down. Why did you pass on the deal, and what has happened to you with regard to the Penn administration or the Penn Law School administration?
Well, this has to do with, the fact that they did impose a penalty on me. It was quite a severe one, frankly, financially. Well, first of all, they're going to suspend me for a year. As I tell people, I have no idea what that means. I think it means I don't teach for a year. But then cut my salary in half for a year, my base salary, my core salary, and then no more summer money ever. And if you put all that money together, and I teach for another 8 or 9 years, it's almost $500,000 that they are docking me, and that is serious money. Okay. Now, as part of the negotiations, they were willing to let up on that a little bit, but the core of the financial penalty was still there. And they just threw in an extra $50,000, because of the loss of my summer money, which is $50,000 a summer, a one-time payment that I was somehow supposed to placate me. Well, frankly, sir, that is chicken feed. Okay, that is chicken feed. I mean, maybe if they'd said 500,000, I would have considered it, and they can well afford that. But the real sticking point is something I find outrageous and dishonorable on their part, which is they wanted me to sign a clause that said that I would never speak about the case they had brought against me, the hearing, the proceedings, the lack of due process, the fabrications and the falsehoods, the dishonest sound bites that twist my words. Their pursuit of me, everything they've done to me, it's been going on for 2.5 years. I wouldn't talk about their hypocrisy, their double standard, the way they treated people after October 7th versus me, and all the awful things they've done. I wouldn't speak about any of that. Silence. They wanted silence. Well, why would they want that? Why would they want that? I'm told, oh, that's routine. Well, it shouldn't be routine. I mean, what is and what ought to be are very different, aren't they? And
Absolutely.
to me, that is just trying to escape accountability. And a academic institution should be all about intellectual rigor, intellectual honesty, accountability. If you're going to do something to a professor, get out there and defend it in an honest way. Explain it. Go through the particulars. Don't hide behind, a muzzling clause or confidentiality. I mean, Confidentiality is supposed to protect me, not them. You know, they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to worry about it. They don't want to have to explain it. Well, what good are they then? Why are they even here? Okay, they might as well go and work as stockbrokers as far as I'm concerned. And the students know it's bogus. Oh, the students fully understand that they are saying one thing and doing another. There are these regular sort of little U cases that come out of the massive bureaucracy that is Penn. Oh, we want people to be able to talk across difference, speak their mind, not self-censor. That is laughable. That is risible. It really is. It's ludicrous.
It's so amazing. And we want to be respectful of your time. We so much appreciate it today.
I have an hour for here, so I've allocated. Yep.
How can our audience get more information about you and your career? You said you're on a lot of different sites. I found you on Wikipedia.
Well, Wikipedia, I wouldn't trust. Wikipedia has gone off the deep end, lefty wise. If they Google me and, articles, go on Google Scholar, which is an open website, or just Google me. I've done a lot of pieces lately because, law reviews won't publish me now that I'm a racist. On Law and Liberty, on the Claremont Review, on the American Conservative. There are these websites that I now have published a number of pieces on recently. Also, I've done a lot of podcasts recently. It's during the time that Penn has been bringing this case against me. It's been very time consuming, and I've in some ways been acting as my own lawyer. I've been working with a lawyer, but I've been very, very involved in what is said and what arguments are made, of course. And I used to be a litigator, and I'm the one who sort of has inside knowledge of what's going on. So that's been terribly time consuming. But I've done a lot of podcasts which are on YouTube with people like Glenn Lowry, Richard Hanania, other people, Louise Perry, people whose names, Luke Sheridan. I just did one with Ayan Hirsi Ali. There's a bunch. And there are more to come because people are now very interested in what's going on and asking me for interviews. I'm not sure that will yield anything because these private universities are hugely powerful, as you know. And it's very hard to hold their feet to the fire. They are a law unto themselves.
It is a fascinating situation, and we do want to be respectful of your time. Professor Amy Wax at the University of Pennsylvania Law School, at least at the present time.
This session is adjourned.
Thanks for joining me for Saving America. If you have questions or comments, please find me on various social media sites. I'm Dr. David D. Schein, and I will see you next week.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.